Muslims, I'm just pointing out, one was reliant largely on reason, and so it would seem to me that the faith is reasonable.
Okay, shifting gears here a little bit, kind of back to feminism. Are women oppressed? Are men oppressed? Who is more oppressed? And I think let's start with Michael on this, and then we'll switch over to you guys. Go ahead.
Yes, women are oppressed. Men are quite oppressed. But what oppresses us is not, like the patriarchy or whatever. What oppresses us is sin and vice. That's what actually does it. True freedom is not, as the feminists and the liberals who preceded them would believe, the ability to do whatever we wish. The right to do wrong. I don't think there's any right to do wrong. I think that's why the word is called a right. I think that liberty is the right to do what we ought to do. And so I think that the truth will set you free, and I think that falsehood will enslave you. And I think that the real oppression we see today is a result of following our appetites, our lower will, disconnected from our rational will. So, I go out and eat a lot of donuts, or I shoot up a bunch of heroin or something, and I am addicted to porn, or I'm sleeping around with all these women, or forget about porn, I'm just indulging my pride on social media, and I'm just doom scrolling all day and not doing any of my work. Those are oppressions because you can't escape them, even when your rational will says, I've had enough drugs, I've eaten enough donuts, I've looked at enough porn. Your appetite comes back in and says, give me more, right? And so you lose your freedom. To quote St. Paul, the things that I want to do, I don't do, and the things that I don't want to do, I do.
So we are oppressed by patriarchy, because didn't you define patriarchy as like male sexual appetite and things like hookup culture?
No, I think patriarchy truly is just, the reflection and the symbol of marriage of the relation between Christ and his church.
Oh, because previously you defined it as things like hookup culture and...
No, I said that we live in a patriarchy in as much as women are not dominant over men, right? And so I agree that women are still bearing the brunt of a lot of terrible things, but it's a perverted patriarchy, were my exact words. And so the true one would be the notion that man is the head of woman as Christ is the head of his church, which makes a lot of liberals shriek these days. But the way that this perverse patriarchy would be practiced today is that man is not like Christ to his church. Man is like a little demon in the Garden of Eden tempting Eve.
So you define current oppression as basically modernity, like things like you said, social media, pride, gluttony, lust.
No, I think real oppression really can only come from sin. I think and the wages of that are death. And so, the law can come in and act in a way that is contrary to justice, and that does happen a lot. But that doesn't really matter. You can be free in a prison cell. The problem for us, the far greater threat to our liberty, is the lack of ability to control ourselves and to live virtuous, flourishing lives. And you can't just blame some guy on TikTok for that. You can't just blame a law for that.
So did you want to respond?
Yeah, I guess I had a question. I do want to ask if you think religion is really good at suppressing that like proclivity for vice. And you would probably label
Not all
something.
religions, but
you would probably label something like pornography consumption as unequivocally a vice and something that oppresses us. Then why is it that in states that have the most evangelical Christians, we see the highest subscriptions to things like Playboy, OnlyFans, Pornhub?
They still have
hookers.
Playboy. Playboy's wholesome.
I'm just painting more of a historical progression. It went from like obviously Penthouse to Playboy to Hustler to now, then to the strip clubs, pornography, restaurants, things like that. Why is that most rampant in red states, specifically religious red states?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I can't speak specifically to evangelical Protestantism because I'm not totally, I'm not one, and I'm just not as familiar with it. I do know that in some of the Protestant denominations, they get a little bit more loosey-goosey on the sex stuff. Obviously, the Lambeth statement permitted contraception and a little bit weirder sex stuff for some Protestants. So I remain a mackerel-snapping papist, and I kind of believe the old-fashioned way that, to quote the great philosopher Norm Macdonald, sex is a filthy, shameful thing that should only be for the purpose of procreation within marriage. So I don't know, if you say, well, in Utah or something, they're looking at porn more, and therefore the Mormons are, hypocrites. Okay, maybe they're hypocrites. First of all, Utah just effectively banned porn because they forced porn companies to have an age, and Pornhub very tellingly said, okay, we're not going to do business there anymore because we rely on kids for our business.
I guess my point is it doesn't seem like religion is a compelling antidote against the vices that you deem to be oppressive. If in these states that have the highest populations of religious people, your type of religion, Christian, why is it that they're indulging in these vices more disproportionately than liberals?
Well, again, I love my Protestant friends, but some of them take a looser view of sexual morality than the Catholics do. The Catholics still have a very rigid view. So I think you're making a little bit of an apples and oranges
conflating it too
comparison.
much.
Yeah, but furthermore, to quote La Rochefoucauld again, hypocrisy is the tribute vice pays to virtue, and religion is a public thing. So we want to pray. We can pray individually. We can avoid looking at porn individually. We can do whatever individually. But we're social creatures, and so if we live in a community that is more likely to put us in the near occasion of sin, we're more likely to fall into that. You know, today, porn is everywhere, right? You can't drive down the street. You certainly can't open social media without that. And if there's more temptation everywhere, you're more likely to fall into it, even if you know it's wrong. And so now we point to those people, we say, well, they're hypocrites. No, they're not hypocrites. They're human beings who
They're
have a standard and fall.
You think they're
fall short of
victims
it.
to like just the rampant porn industry?
Yeah, I think the porn industry certainly victimizes people.
Do you think porn worsened it more than prior? Like, do you kind of
for
blame
sure.
the
Yeah.
porn industry?
Yeah, I think porn industry is awful and should be wiped off the face of the earth.
Can we talk about what consequences you're seeing since the proliferation of porn that makes society so much worse? Like,
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Well, you see, I mean, you know, again, to go back to all those studies, you see a big spike in sexual aggression. You see a big spike in...
wait.
No,
crime
there's
is
been a
down since
decline in rape
porn,
since
early
pornography
2000s?
spiked.
Crime is
Rape.
way down.
Yeah.
Well, okay, just, I mean...
And
And
rape is
domestic
way down.
violence.
Yeah,
And abortion is way down.
Yeah.
Seems like it's
abortion, no. Abortion,
from the early 2000s, yeah.
abortion is unfortunately slightly up even after the Dobbs decision, though if you go into the state-by-state data, babies still have been saved, and it's somewhat complicated.
But since porn became widely available, what's worse? Because it's not violence.
So what you're saying is, because there's porn now, people are getting married less, they're having fewer babies, they're getting pregnant
I'm
less,
not even
and maybe
saying
they're having
causation.
fewer
I'm
abortions.
just saying if porn just made society it's so catastrophic, what are the outcomes you're seeing? Because it's not violence.
Yeah,
Well, I think you would say porn is bad as an end in itself, right?
Yeah, it's intrinsically
Yeah.
evil, but also if you're interested in some studies or something, and again, I don't even really buy studies, but I think it was 2010 out of the University of Arkansas, a survey of the most popular porn, not all porn, but the most popular porn videos showed 88% depicted sexual aggression, verbal or physical. There was a study that came out about 10 years ago out of Denmark that showed that regular porn use increased misogynistic attitudes, which I totally agree. There was another study that came out of, I think it was Indiana, a few years ago, which showed that regular porn consumption was correlated with sexual aggressiveness in both men and women, which I don't think is a very good thing. And then there was another study, I forget which state it came out of, in like 2015 or 2019, which showed that porn use and sexual interactions online for women were a reliable predictor of in real life sexual violence committed against them. So again, I grant you that
Yeah, there's a bunch of
you've got your
studies in the
studies, I've got my
opposite
studies.
direction, yeah.
But there, in as much as you do believe the social scientific data, there is a lot of evidence that porn has had disastrous consequences.
Pixie, you had something, I think, a little bit before this. Go ahead.
Yeah, basically, earlier when you were saying like, oh no, people aren't doing porn or watching pornographic content more often because they're surrounded by it, they can't help it. So even if it comes to a virtuous person, if they're surrounded, they're still going to fall prey to it. But to me, that doesn't necessarily track, and I don't want to be offensive here, but the Catholic Church, especially priests who are supposed to be surrounded by those who are holy, tend to have like some of the highest rates of like child abuse.
No, they don't. I mean, there's obviously a child sex abuse crisis. It was 20 years ago, especially in the Catholic Church.
And even recently, if we looked at like the past like 10 years, like not enough has been done.
Obviously, there's a lot of media attention on that, and it's a terrible problem. But if you compare rates of child sexual abuse within the Catholic Church to any other religious community, among Christians, it's flat. It's exactly the same as the Protestants. Among certain Orthodox Jews, it's actually significantly lower. And then my favorite statistic here, though it's very dark, is that the rates of sexual abuse from the Catholic Church against children is about half the rate as public school teachers against children. So, it's all bad, but it's not particularly.
From what I've seen, it hasn't. At least from what I've seen, that's not necessarily true. What I've seen is that
it's true. I can promise you.
Okay, we'll fact check later, or right now actually we could. But one of the specific reasons, and I'll grant you this, or grant this to the Catholic Church at least, is that the reason why the Catholic Church has higher rates of sexual abuse compared to Protestants is not because Protestants are necessarily doing it less, but it's because the Catholic Church investigates it more. But even
they
with
do investigate it a lot. I think the rate. It depends on which Protestant group you're comparing it to, but. And some Protestant groups don't have
I do
numbers
want to
on
go
this.
to the question for this side, Farah, Pixie, and Jasmine. Are women oppressed? Are men oppressed? Who is more oppressed? starting with Farah, and then we'll come this way.
Kind of like patriarchy, I think oppressed is a hefty word. I prefer just the term marginalized, and I think women are marginalized more than men.
Okay.
Didn't we just say that women are graduating college at a higher rate than men? Like there are more women in college than men.
Depends.
But didn't we also say that the culture, women move in lockstep to male desires in terms of things like hookup culture and just the culture at large? Didn't you also admit that?
I'm not saying women are in a good spot. I'm just saying, how is it that if women are the majority of the population, and they're represented as the majority in these apparently desirable places such as universities, you couldn't say they're marginalized because they're the majority, so they're not the margin.
I think you could still be othered even if you're a majority, if there's a louder minority, yes. That's why I didn't use the term oppressed. That's why I used marginalized.
Do you think men are louder than women?
100%. They speak more words per minute. I mean, that's just a fact.
Well, that's because Shapiro brings up the
That's true.
Your answer, Pixie.
Men and women are both oppressed. They're both oppressed in different ways. I do not like playing oppression Olympics because I think that both
You can play.
No, I don't want to play. They both have very, very legitimate reasons to feel oppressed.
Okay.
So that's where I stand.
Jasmine, what about you?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think men and women are oppressed, but I think if you're looking at who's more oppressed in a society and you're looking at what metric to use, I think the male-female one is really terrible. I think class and privilege and stuff has a way bigger effect on how oppressed you will be rather than your gender. Like if I was a guy, I think maybe my life would be maybe a little bit worse, maybe a little better. If I was in a different family, it could be different. It just depends on so many factors. But class, I think, is much bigger than men versus women.
That's like the old school leftist view where you focus on class over racial or sexual identity. You know what's weird though is when you look at rates of depression drug use. You would think that it would vary by class. I think of the average person on prescription drugs as like a fair upper middle class white lady with maybe one or two kids in the suburbs somewhere. But it's not. There's actually very little difference among all classes. We're all just depressed and on drugs.
I don't know. I'd be curious to see that exact data point because I also know that it's harder for people that's like in the lower classes to be covered properly by health insurance and probably like get proper medication in general.
Well, the lowest classes are on Medicaid. It's kind of that lower middle that has a little trouble.
The opioid crisis isn't affecting people at Yale and law school. It's like there is a class.
The cocaine crisis is affecting people.
But cocaine people are still highly functioning, good attorneys and whatever on cocaine. You can't really do that as much on fentanyl. Yeah. But so yeah, I think class does affect. Especially the kind of drugs you get addicted to and all that.
Well, and especially to your point on class, like the fact that people in the lower socioeconomic classes are much less likely to get married and much more likely to have kids out of wedlock. To me, this is one of the most, bringing it all the way back, this is one of the most evil aspects of feminism, is that a lot of the supposed feminists don't really practice what they preach. In fact, I think a lot of elite liberals don't really practice what they preach because they're more likely to get married and they're more likely to go to some school and
they have less sex as well, less casual sex.
Less casual sex, and they do so. But the way they talk is they say, "No, man, we need total liberation. We need a revolution, man. Whatever, you know." And then, unfortunately, it's the lower socioeconomic classes who buy that garbage and they ruin their lives.
I agree with you there. I think we need to do a better job of explaining to people like for me, I do sex work. I don't I don't advocate for everybody to do that.
Why not?
Because I think you have to have a specific type of temperament for it. You have to be willing to understand the consequences for it. Like me, I thought about my values. I thought about who I was, and it aligned with that. If you're like 18 and you don't know what you're doing, I don't know if it's a good option for you to jump into. I don't even think it's a good option for you to jump into marriage either. You have to think about who you are and who your values are.
You want to be prepared to be married. I thought you were going to say you didn't think it was a good idea for me to jump into sex work, which
I think
would have been very
fine.
offensive.
I think you'd be fine. I think you'd make a lot of money.
Come on, you're going to make me
you
blush.
two together?
Should he start
a couples page?
What if Michael Knowles started like a cigar review OnlyFans?
I like that. I was thinking I'd recite Italian poetry on OnlyFans.
That would be good. Do you speak Latin?
Shirtless?
A little bit. Shirtless. All right, calm down.
Whoa, okay.
Listen,
pump the brakes a little bit there. Okay.
Do you think you would come to regret doing the
Not me,
OnlyFans?
but I think some people would.
You don't think there's a chance you'll come to regret it?
No. Why would I regret it?
If, say, you wanted to get married and have kids and you found it harder to...
I don't think so, because I think that I typically like men. Like, for instance, I always tell this story. Like, I didn't have any social media before I started OnlyFans. And like, one guy I was on a date with was like, "Oh, I love that because you're not showing off your body." I just ghosted him. Like, I don't like men like that. I like men that have similar values to me, where they don't correlate modesty with morality and that they don't really care.
Do you think that guys who... like look at a lot of porn and are very pro porn, and do you think they tend to make better or worse husbands.
Well, we know that the ones that
Yeah.
actually have issues with porn, the biggest predictor of that is moral incongruence. So Catholics should not watch porn. It seems to have really negative impacts on your marriages and lives. But if you're not Catholic and you don't have negative attitudes towards porn, you are way less likely to have issues with it.
Do you think that if you watch porn a lot, you're really into it, you're more or less likely to step out on your marriage?
I don't know if there's any data on that.
Well, you said a lot, so you're adding kind of like an
No,
addiction.
upwards
data
of,
would
upwards of
suggest.
90% of
Overconsumption.
men watch porn. I don't know if men who watch porn are more likely to cheat. I haven't seen anything to indicate that, nor would that even be my...
The social scientific data that I have seen would suggest that regular porn use is associated with all sorts of vices and pathologies, and including marital infidelity. And so that would be one thing you wouldn't want. You wouldn't want your husband sleeping around with other women.
I don't mind if he watches porn. And I think a lot of women don't.
But if what I'm saying is, if watching porn made him less virtuous, and even just the fact that you're trying to cook for the kids, right, and you're trying to do something, and he's just in the bedroom somewhere selfishly doing something that's kind of shameful, and you don't brag about it, even if you're
I watch porn. What am I supposed? I'm supposed to tell him you don't do it, and I'll do it.
Yeah. Well, no, neither of you should do it. Neither of you should
I
do
want
it.
that clipped.
Neither of you should do it. But you should not let your own personal eccentricities, or call it vices, stop you from recognizing them as vices per se. It's not hypocrisy to have a standard and fail it. And I fear that because we today have suggested that it is, a lot of people recognize their problems with what they're doing. Maybe you like porn a lot, but there are a lot of people who worked in the porn industry who have had terrible outcomes. They leave the industry, they say it was just awful and abusive. And I'm with the sex-negative feminists on this. I think it's really degrading to women. And another statistic: 97% of the recipients of violence and aggression in pornography are women. It's usually not the men. Maybe in some cases.
That's
but
like
it's usually the
OnlyFans.
women.
You should be pro OnlyFans then, because it eliminates a lot of that.
Democratizing the pornography industry. I don't know. I don't know that would shrink it, which would be my goal. But even
Shrink the abuse, which it has.
It's the most ethical form.
It's the most ethical form
Yeah,
to watch
I don't-
and to
I don't know.
make.
An ethical porn to me is sort of like a vegan lion.
Well, you
or
just said
really
you have to
wet
hold yourself
fire.
to a standard.